80 years. That's really all it took for Islam to spread from the Indus Valley all the way to the Iberian Peninsula,
Mhm.
modern-day Spain and Portugal.
It's an absolutely mind-boggling expansion, especially the speed.
Yeah, incredible speed. And if you contrast that with the Mongol Empire centuries later, well, they carved out a huge territory, sure.
Right, but their lasting cultural impact just wasn't the same, was it? It didn't have that um, deeply transformative and enduring power you see with early Islam.
That's a really key point.
Right.
The initial spread wasn't just about conquest.
No, it was laying the foundations for a whole new civilization,
Uh,
and naturally, the early focus had to be on the basics,
it's
right?
like understanding the Quran, collecting the Prophet's traditions, getting the Arabic language systemized.
Exactly. That initial groundwork, though, really paved the way for this intellectual and artistic explosion a few centuries later, the Islamic Golden Age, as we often call it.
Right. Because after that initial consolidation, something really remarkable happened. The Islamic world just became this hub of intellectual flourishing.
And what's so interesting, I think, is that it wasn't in isolation.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It was deeply rooted in the knowledge of civilizations that came before. You think about that huge effort to absorb and then build on learning from, well, the Greeks, the Syriacs, Persians, even Indian scholars.
Absolutely. The translation movement, especially under the Abbasids, was just crucial. I mean, imagine these vast amounts of philosophical, scientific, even metaphysical text pouring into Arabic.
People like Hunayn ibn Ishaq and
Yeah.
Luqafa, they were central, weren't they?
Totally. They weren't just enriching Arabic itself, they were basically creating the intellectual toolkit for the philosophy and science schools that were about to bloom. This willingness to integrate, diverse sources, that's key to the dynamism, prevented things from getting stagnant.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we're going to zoom right in on this fascinating period, the emergence of Islamic philosophy and science during this golden age.
And we've got a great guide. It's a compilation of lectures from Harvard back in '62, published as Three Muslim Siljas.
Yeah, it gives a really insightful look at this pivotal moment.
It does. And through that lens, we're focusing on three key figures, Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, and Avicenna ibn Sina, as he's known in the East.
Right, all active during the Abbasid era. And they represent this critical stage where they're actively grappling with and integrating all this inherited wisdom into, well, an Islamic framework.
You could think of them as intellectual architects, really, building something new but on existing foundations.
So pioneers,
Oh,
Al-Kindi starting late 8th, early 9th century, then Al-Farabi building on that 9th, 10th, and Avicenna bridging the 10th and 11th.
exactly.
And our mission today really is to pull out the most compelling insights. How did these three shape Islamic thought? What made them so significant? And, offer you a bit of a shortcut to understanding this really crucial period in intellectual history.
Let's start with Al-Kindi then, often seen as the father of philosophy within the Islamic world. Born in Basra, maybe around 801 AD.
And he came from an aristocratic Arab background, right? Good education in Basra, which had links to Jundar, that famous center, and then Baghdad.
Right. Baghdad was the vibrant heart of learning then under the Abbasids. And what's striking about Al-Kindi is how quickly he mastered all this newly translated philosophy and science.
He wasn't just reading it, was he? He was actively working to synthesize it, to mesh it with an Islamic worldview.
Precisely. And he seems to have been pretty influential at court, favored by Caliphs al-Mamun and al-Mutasim, even tutored al-Mutasim's son.
Wow. That kind of access must have been incredibly important for his work. Resources, platform.
Absolutely. And it's also fascinating that while he was always a big name, a lot of his actual writings were lost or undiscovered until pretty recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a major rediscovery in Istanbul just a few decades ago.
Mhm.
So now we have a much more direct line to his original ideas.
That's incredible. The sources say he might have written, 240 works, according to the Friestat 10th century book catalog.
Yeah, but only maybe 40 or 50 survive. Still, even that shows his extraordinary range.
Metaphysics, logic, classifying sciences, talking about Aristotle, his treatise on the intellect, which was big in the West too.
Uh-huh. And a whole load of works on natural and mathematical sciences. His impact on the Latin West, actually, is pretty noteworthy.
Especially in astrology.
Yes, he became a major authority there, one of the 9 Judases, the ultimate authorities. And his reputation lasted right into the Renaissance. Cardano ranked him among the 12 most influential thinkers ever.
Wow, that's quite something. It really underlines his broad curiosity. Logic, science, medicine, music, theology, metaphysics. He covered it all.
He did, and there's that great quote from his treatise on metaphysics, something like,
We should not be ashamed to acknowledge truth from whatever source it comes,
Mhm.
even from past generations or foreign peoples.
Exactly. That really shows
Yeah.
his intellectual openness, which, like we said, was so crucial for that whole era.
But he wasn't just taking it all in uncritically, right? He was
Mm.
trying to harmonize it with his Islamic faith.
Definitely. He actively sought to do that. He leaned towards Mutazilite theology, that school emphasizing reason, free will, a created Quran.
And he tried to give it a philosophical underpinning.
Yeah. He thought about two kinds of knowledge: divine knowledge, given to prophets, which was superior, and then human knowledge, with philosophy as its highest form.
So for Al-Kindi, revealed truth like creation out of nothing, ex nihilo, or the resurrection that held a higher status, even if philosophy couldn't quite grasp it or seemed to contradict it.
That seems to be the key insight. He saw revelation as ultimately above philosophical reasoning, even while embracing things like Neoplatonic ideas about intellects and heavens. He subordinated philosophy to revelation.
A careful navigation.
It seems so. And his influence spread through his students, too. People like al-Sarakhsi, Abu Mashar al-Balkhi al-Bumasar in the West, the famous astrologer,
All right.
and Abu Zaid al-Balkhi, an early geographer. They carried his ideas forward, especially in the sciences, and sort of bridged the gap to our next figure.
Which brings us to Abu Nasr al-Farabi, died around 950 AD in Damascus. Different background, Turkic, from Transoxiana, ended up in Baghdad.
But his impact was profound. They called him the second teacher.
After Aristotle. That says a lot about his intellectual stand.
It really does. Al-Farabi is credited with comprehensively organizing and formulating all these different branches of knowledge within Islamic civilization. His Aisalunum, Introduction to the Sciences, basically.
That was the first widely known classification of sciences for Muslims.
Pretty much, he gave them a structured roadmap for intellectual work, a framework that influenced scholars for generations.
And he wasn't just cataloging. He made big contributions to logic, too.
Absolutely. Building on Aristotle, adding his own insights, really cementing logic's place in the Islamic tradition. He wrote influential commentaries on Aristotle's logic.
But maybe even more famous is his attempt to reconcile Plato and Aristotle.
Yes, he didn't see them as fundamentally opposed. He thought their ideas could be harmonized. His big work, The Book of Argument Between the Ideas of the Two Sages, that really shows his effort to find the common ground. The universal truth is underneath.
It's interesting, the source notes mention that the medieval view of Aristotle included the theology of Aristotle, which was actually Neoplatonic from Plotinus.
Right, which definitely shaped how Al-Farabi saw the connection between Plato and Aristotle. That Neoplatonic influence was key to his reconciliation project.
But his work wasn't just logic and metaphysics.
Yeah.
He's also seen as the founder of political philosophy in Islam.
Yes, drawing heavily on Plato, especially the Republic and the laws as they were understood then.
So Al-Farabi had this vision of an ideal state, linking Plato's philosopher king idea with the prophets and lawgivers of the Abrahamic faiths.
Exactly. Works like his Treatise on the Opinions of the Citizens of the Ideal State and on Attaining Happiness became foundational texts for Islamic political thought, even influencing people like Averroes later on.
But then there's this other side to him. The source mentions a strong connection with Sufism, Islamic mysticism, tasawwuf.
Yeah, which might seem surprising given the focus on logic and politics, but apparently he lived a life that reflected many Sufi ideals: detachment from worldly things, love of nature, simplicity.
Holding classes outdoors by a river.
Right, away from the city bustle. And his clothing, sometimes simple Central Asian dress, sometimes deliberately outshining everyone at court. It shows this fascinating balance.
Intense intellect, but also a deep spiritual side.
It does. And that brings us to our third sage, Abu Ali al-Hussein ibn Abdallah ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna.
Born near Bukhara, 980 AD, Persian origin. And a real prodigy.
An incredible prodigy, memorized the Quran by 10, mastered loads of sciences by 16. Just amazing.
His life sounds turbulent, though.
Yeah.
Political upheaval, working as a doctor for different rulers, even vizier, getting imprisoned.
Very eventful, a stark contrast to a quiet academic life.
Yet his intellectual output was just staggering.
Unbelievable. They say he could dictate treatises even while traveling, and his impact is just immense. He basically set the foundation for medieval scholastic philosophy, East and West. He synthesized Hippocratic and Galenic medicine. His influence on Islamic arts and sciences is probably unparalleled.
Let's dig into some core ideas. The source highlights his distinction between essence and existence. Can you unpack that a bit?
Okay, so Avicenna argued that In our minds, we can think about the essence of something, its whatness, its nature, what he called quiddity, separately from whether it actually exists out there in the world.
Right.
But he believed in the external world, for any real object, its essence and its existence are totally united. They aren't two separate things stuck together. It sounds abstract, but it was fundamental to his whole metaphysical system.
And this ties into his cosmology, his
Okay.
idea of the necessary being God and then possible beings, everything else.
Precisely. Everything in the universe, for Avicenna, is a possible being. Its existence depends on something else, namely the necessary being God. And he split these possible beings into two types.
Okay.
Those made necessary by God, like pure intellectual substances, you might think of them as angels, and those that are just possible in themselves, like us, creatures in the physical world, subject to change, birth, decay.
And within this structure, he had a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Intellect, soul, body.
Yes. Intellect. Totally separate from matter, unchanging. Soul. Distinct from matter, but needs a body to act through. And body. The material, divisible part. Those are the basic building blocks of reality for him.
The source also talks about the 10th intellect as an illuminator of the human mind, helping us grasp universal concepts.
Exactly. It's a crucial piece. Avicenna saw this kind of cycle. Universal ideas exist up in the angelic mind, as he put it. They descend into the material world, becoming specific in individual things.
Okay.
Then the 10th intellect shines a light, so to speak, on our human minds, allowing us to abstract those specifics and see the universal concept again. It's how we understand things. And this 10th intellect was also tied to creation and revelation to prophets.
So it connects human understanding, the heavens, and God's communication. That's quite a system.
It really is. And he saw a similar connection in the natural world, too. The mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms forming a continuous ladder.
No missing links.
Right. Each kingdom has the abilities of the ones below it, plus its own. Plants have mineral properties plus growth and reproduction. Animals have all that, plus movement driven by desire and anger and comprehension through senses.
Both internal and external senses. He detailed those.
Yeah, based on the Galenic medical tradition. 5 external senses, 5 internal senses, things like common sense, imagination, memory.
It's clear he was steeped in philosophy and science, but the source stresses he was also a devout Muslim. These weren't separate worlds for him.
Not at all. His faith deeply shaped his work. He wrote poetry, Quran commentary. His philosophy consistently tried to align with Islamic views. He was apparently quite sensitive about accusations of being irreligious.
Defended his faith in his writings.
Yes, and there's that story about him praying in a mosque when stuck on an intellectual problem. He even wrote treatises on the power of prayer.
So he saw this deep harmony, a sympathy connecting all levels of reality, strengthened by worship,
Yeah.
rooted in God's love.
Exactly, and that feeds into his theory of prophecy, too. He thought a prophet's intellect was exceptionally receptive to illumination from that 10th intelligence.
And their imagination, too,
Yeah.
translating abstract truths into concrete images.
Right. So the prophetic mission had 2 sides for him. Theoretical, belief in God, revelation, the afterlife, and practical, setting up social order, laws.
And finally, that allegorical piece, the recital of the bird, a symbol of the soul's journey.
Yes, a symbolic depiction of the soul coming down into the material world and its longing to return to its celestial origin. It's a more poetic way of looking at that journey.
A beautiful image.
Okay.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, we've looked at Al-Kindi, the pioneer integrator, Al-Farabi, the great organizer and political philosopher, and Avicenna, that towering figure whose system dominated for centuries.
And the key takeaway, I think, is how they all built on this incredible intellectual legacy from earlier civilizations, but they did it firmly within an Islamic framework. That fusion, that's what led to these unique and incredibly influential traditions.
Hopefully this is giving you, our listener, a clearer picture of this crucial time, maybe delivered some of those aha moments. Understanding these foundational thinkers really does give you a framework for what came next, both in the Islamic world and its impact on the West.
And it leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? Consider how that interplay, inherited knowledge and religious principles, didn't just shape Islamic thought back then, but how that dynamic between reason and faith continues to play out in different cultures today.
Yeah. What aspects of their approach, integrating different kinds of knowledge, what might still be relevant for us now in our own information-heavy age, something to ponder.